Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It is my delight to convene this presentation, and this is part of the 150th celebration of poor handmade presents in the United States. So it's one of a number of offerings that the 150th Planning Committee has prepared for us, and I think this one is going to be an afternoon full of new information, inspiration, and a brand new way of appreciating our congregational history. We have two presenters this afternoon, and I have the honor of introducing them. Our first presenter will be Dr. Tom Buchanan, and then the second presenter will be via the technology and the miracle of internet and all that, and that will be Herr Keller from Germany. But we'll start with Dr. Buchanan. He will speak to us for approximately 50 minutes. He'll speak till 2 o'clock. And the focus of both segments of our afternoon will be a particular period of time in our congregational history. And that will be the time when we celebrated our 25th anniversary as a congregation. And that was in 1876, and I check my math. And at that time, we know that our founders commissioned a triptych as a special commemoration of that anniversary. We'll hear about that triptych in Herr Keller's presentation, but Dr. Tom Buchanan's presentation will set the historical context. And he will talk about what is going on in the United States of America and in Germany at that time. And he's certainly a very qualified individual to share that information with us. He's been on the faculty of Ancilla College for 26 years. Wow. Yes. And he will use one of his teaching techniques that we're very familiar with as we walk past his classroom. He has a lot of information on PowerPoint for us. And Dr. Buchanan earned his master's and his PhD from Ball State University. And his wife, Carol, is here with us. We're always happy to have Carol. And so, without taking any more time away from the great input that I know Dr. Buchanan will give us, I welcome him. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sister Judith. Please feel free to take all the time you like. So yes, I am Dr. Buchanan, and we're going to be looking at the United States and Imperial Germany in the decade of the 1870s. So I thought we'd start first with the U.S., and as you might imagine, it was a very different world, how many years ago? 140 years ago? In the South, things are still pretty rough. The Civil War has only been over for 5 years by the time the 1870s started. Labor-intensive slave labor cash crops are gone with the wind. The South had based its entire economy upon cash crops: rice, hemp, sugar beets, indigo, and of course tobacco and cotton. And it had very little industry, which is one of the reasons why it lost the war. And that concentration of power in the hands of the planters dominated economically and politically and socially. And at the end of the war, that was gone. So the South is basically destroyed in all those areas. So it's going to require a lot of fixing to try to repair that part of the country. Sharecropping develops as a means of trying to help poor blacks and whites find some way of living. You're now working somebody else's land. Some of the plantations are broken up, but sharecroppers are paid very little, and the work is very hard and very long and not a very pleasant way to make a living. The soil is largely exhausted, so there's another problem. You can only grow cotton in the same field for so many years before the yield starts going down. And the Southerners, because that was a cash crop, they made money doing that. That's what they planted, but it wore the soil out. And after a while, even if slavery hadn't collapsed, they probably wouldn't have been able to maintain that system. High property taxes after the war. The Reconstruction governments needed money. Obviously, everything needed to be rebuilt, right? And you have hundreds of thousands of orphans and widows who need taken care of. They desperately needed tax money. But the problem is, if you raise those property tax rates so high, the only thing you're going to get is a lot of foreclosures. People can't pay high property taxes if they go beyond a certain level. And foreclosing, a property does not generate economic wealth to be taxed. So it was a bad circle to be in. Infrastructure and crop fields lay and run. So the South has a lot of issues. And the North isn't feeling very magnanimous toward it. As the one you spend a lot of its money, there you build it. Little industry or economic diversity. We were talking about that earlier. The South had almost no factories. So, as I said, they're going to have to find something here economically. A lot of political turmoil. We had this Reconstruction era, 1865 to 1877. First, Abraham Lincoln, the president, is the first one to really hit the ground running with the program. But Lincoln's terms were very magnanimous. Many people wanted harsher terms for the South. And of course, after Lincoln's death, we have Andrew Johnson's ideas, his successors. Then we have Congress, the radical Republicans with their ideas. Finally, the military divides the South up into military zones and assigns a military governor. So the Reconstruction policy was never consistent. So here's another problem for the South after the war, just in case they needed a few more problems. It's hard to cooperate with federal Reconstruction policy when you don't know what it is. It's constantly evolving.
Dr. Buchanan,
Yes.
I need to raise your mic.
Sure.
A little bit so they can hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. You mean I'm taller than Sister Judith?
A little bit.
Okay. Is that better, folks?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So, as I said, the South is in ruins. The money is no good. You might as well use it for wallpaper or to light your fires with. Confederate bonds were repudiated. Any money you'd loaned to the Confederacy was gone. So economic turmoil in addition to political turmoil. And as we said, widows, orphans, wounded need help, but little help is available. So not the good old days. The South is devastated. Large southern cities look as if they'd been destroyed by nuclear weapons. Richmond, Virginia, Atlanta, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, Vicksburg, Mississippi. It's a long, long line. And, you'd think, how are they ever going to fix that? I mean, the roads were clogged with ruins and corpses and dead horses. It's just awful. And, of course, you have to come up with a new economic system, right? Because the old slavery system is gone. So what's that going to be like? And here's another little problem. There's going to be a new relationship between blacks and whites down there. Slavery is gone. Unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of the white population in that time and that place did not believe in racial equality. So, you could say slavery is going to be gone, but if the native whites have any input on this, they're going to darn well create some kind of system that does not support racial equality. And, that's what they did. When Reconstruction ended in 1877, with the federal troops pulled out, you saw the creation of Jim Crow laws and black codes. Things which said like no more than 2 black people on a street corner at a time. Blacks couldn't be in the public parks after 9 o'clock, that sort of thing. If you're a black person walking down a sidewalk and a white person is walking toward you, you're supposed to step off the sidewalk and put your head down, and you don't speak to that white unless they speak to you first. So, slavery is gone, but they're going to do everything they can to bring it some close facsimile to it. All right, so it's a long way to go in terms of race relations as well. All right, I'm going backwards, I think, here. Yes, let's go the other way. In the North, there are issues there as well. Farmers have a hard time of it. They're fighting both banks and railroads. Farmers don't like banks, okay? And there's a reason why. These banks make money by loaning money, getting it paid back fairly quickly, and then loaning it out again. But if you're a farmer, you might have to borrow that money in February, and you may not be able to pay it back until October, after your crops are harvested. And so banks didn't like that. They wanted shorter payback periods. The farmers are saying, we can't speed up Mother Nature. It takes that long. And the banks also demanded high collateral and high interest rates on loans to farmers, which farmers resented. Of course, the bank's point of view is, you farmers are higher, threats. There's more things that can go wrong. You're at greater risk. So we're entitled to higher interest on your loans and higher collateral and so forth. So if you're a farmer, let's say you want to borrow $1,500, you might have to put up your entire farm, which is worth $20,000, to be able to borrow $1,500. And if you can't pay that $1,500 back, you've lost your farm. So you can see why that's a very strained relationship there. And farmers didn't like railroads either. They felt that the railroads were cheating them and taking advantage. Farmers as a whole are not a very happy group here. They're producing a lot of crops, and they've progressed from subsistence farming to market farming, but the individual farmer just doesn't have any market power. If I'm a farmer growing corn, and let's say all of you folks are growing corn, how's my corn any different from yours? Right? There's no product differentiation. So, they're all producing the same product, and that drives down the prices. So in addition to feel like they're being taken advantage of by the banks and the railroads, their crop prices are also falling in the years after the Civil War. And many farmers, unfortunately, decided the best thing to do was to produce more. They're thinking if our profit margin for bushels going down, we better just put more bushels out there. And of course, overproduction was the problem in the first place. So a lot of problems for farmers. Alienation, they felt that the government did all kinds of things to help industrialists, but did nothing to help them. Farmers felt isolated from each other, and they were in danger all the time from a natural disaster. You might have borrowed money to plant that crop, watched over it like a mother hen, done anything you can to protect it, and then right before harvest comes a drought or a flood or a cyclone, and you're ruined. You've lost your entire farm because of one bad crop. So, it's a tough time for some folks in the north as well. Farmers hate high tariffs. Tariff, of course, is a tax on imports. Industrialists wanted that because it created a market for industrial goods in the United States. Americans would not buy foreign-made goods if they were so expensive. By putting a tariff on them, that made them so expensive that Americans would buy American. The idea being, let's keep American jobs and American profits and American money in America. But there's a downside to tariffs. And if, we should know this now, if we didn't know this before. If you impose tariffs against another country, guess what they're going to do? Yeah, they're going to impose tariffs against our goods. So farmers not only are selling their products at a loss here in America, they can't sell them abroad either because of the tariffs. Plus, tariffs make the price of all manufactured goods more expensive, not just the foreign. And it's farmers who don't have industry who have to pay for everything. And, it's another drain on their pocketbook. So it's kind of funny about tariffs. That was an issue back at the time of George Washington, and it's still an issue to this day. Every single administration had to deal with that issue. Farmers gradually begin to help themselves. They form co-ops, and one thing they do is start creating their own banks. They thought the only way we're going to have banks which are sympathetic to our needs are going to be if we establish these banks ourselves. So they did, and these banks had longer payback periods. They had shorter interest and collateral terms, and more advantageous to people trying to make their living off the land. Farmers would also get together and build silos. Now, if you drive around rural Indiana, you can't help but see silos, right? So silos are round buildings used to store grain crops. And the idea was if you could keep your crops off the market at first when the prices are really low because everybody's trying to sell at the same time, and then wait till the prices are higher, then you could sell them and make some money. But you had to have some place to store those grain crops. And the individual farmer couldn't afford to build a silo on his own. So they would get together and share their resources and build these silos. And it didn't matter if your soybeans got mixed up with Farmer Brown's soybeans because they're all the same, right? You just kept track of how many bushels you put in there. So farmers, started helping themselves. We saw the Patrons of Husbandry formed, also known as the Grangers, and the Farm Bureau formed, and the Farmers Alliances. So it took the farmers a while to get organized, but they did. They started figuring things out. Okay. Prevailing beliefs. One is called manifest destiny, still popular at that time. I think still popular in some circles. It's this idea that God especially favors the United States. This was popular around the time of the Mexican War, but as I said, I think to some degree it's still popular today. You can see why people might believe that. In 1783, we're negotiating with the British for our independence at the end of the Revolutionary War. We were hoping just to have England recognize the independence of the seaboard colonies. Instead, England gives us all the land west to the Mississippi River. This is a huge amount of land. We hadn't been foreseeing that. And then 20 years later, we're negotiating with Napoleon to try to get access to New Orleans, and the French offer us the entire Louisiana territory for about 3 cents an acre. Would you like to buy some prime land for 3 cents an acre? That's a pretty good deal. Thomas Jefferson was hesitant at first because he wasn't sure he had the constitutional authority to do this, but the realist in him won, and he did. And with a stroke of a pen, we again doubled the size of the country. And then in 1848, at the end of the Mexican War, we forced a treaty on the defeated Mexicans called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, in which the United States took Texas and took California and all the land in between. Basically, we're taking half of Mexico. So if you did believe in manifest destiny, there sure seemed to be proof of it. You know, within a few years, we were truly an ocean-to-ocean country, and God seemed to favor the United States. Why would people think that, in addition to just getting all this land? Maybe it's because we were, a democratic republic, or at least the beginnings of such. Or maybe it's because we didn't have the long, bloody history that the European nations had. Who knows? But many people did believe that God especially favored the United States. So that was a very prevalent idea. And the Monroe Doctrine, first established actually by John Quincy Adams, President Monroe's Secretary of State, basically just said Europe would keep its nose out of American matters, and we'd keep our nose clear of Europe. So this is a time period when people felt the oceans could protect us, and this was a very popular idea as well. Okay. Industrialization. We're a growing country. In 1860, right before the war starts, and by the way, when I was a young man, I'd often hear older people talk about all their aches and pains, and I think that's all they talk about. You know, it's like their grandkids and how sore they are, you know, and I rolled my eyes. But now I'm kind of getting into that territory. I have arthritis in both knees, so if I sit down here shortly, please bear with me, okay? I'm doing the best I can there in reference to that. 1860, our population is 31 million. By 1900, 75 million. Okay. Now, we didn't really gain that through huge territorial advances. We did gain Alaska, but that was just a tiny portion of that gain. Most of that is immigration into the United States. Okay, so there's something else that's always been an issue. And of course, more children are living to adulthood to reproduce. There's a factor. Plus, there's internal migration. More people are moving to the cities. If you're a young man, it's a lot easier to find a young woman in the city than back home on the turnip farm. So, the population is growing. And that increase, my gosh, somebody do the math for me, 44 million? That increase itself is larger than the population of most of the other nations of the world. So, that's going to be a lot of people to provide goods for, isn't it? Remember, every man, every woman, every child is a consumer. We all need stuff. And whether it's clothes or, toys or furniture or whatever it happens to be. So there's a big incentive to produce more because of that growing population. Okay, plus, the larger that population, the larger the labor pool. If I owned a factory and you folks worked for me, and I'd be generous, let's say I'm paying you $0.25 an hour. Wow. Thank you so much. That would be great. I'm a real nice guy. I'm going to pay you $0.25 an hour. And you come to me and you say, that's on, if you're going to pay us 30 cents an hour or we're going to go on strike, I'm going to say, you're fired. And that day I can hire people in who will work for 20 cents an hour because there's so many people needing jobs. So, that large labor pool was very conducive to getting parts made, but not very conducive to producing happiness and well-being for the working class. But there was that large pool of cheap labor always available who would work for less than somebody else. Okay. Here's another stat that kind of proves how we've really grown here. 1860, the United States produced about 13,000 tons of steel. By 1900, that was about 11,227,000 tons. 40 years, a gigantic increase. Now, what do you think that? Where do you think a lot of that steel was going? Any idea? Railroads, buildings, right? Steel beam construction, like in new cities such as Chicago. It's how you get those high buildings. Sure. Mm-hmm. And of course, the steel is used to in the railroad industry to build buildings and to build machines. You have some kind of industry, you're going to have to use machines, right? Presses, hammers, upsetters. Most of those are usually made by steel, and at this time made with steel, powered by steam. Yes, good. Steam tractors, combines, reapers, diskers, sure, all that. So I like to cite that statistic because it kind of shows you, how we were really taking off. I think part of that impetus was the Civil War. The Union government needed everything, so whatever you produced during the war, you could sell. But after the war, there's this growing population, wanting more products, there's more workers, and the United States is blessed with a lot of things that facilitates this increase, as we'll be seeing here very shortly. Hopefully. Okay. You saw the rise of corporations, which made it possible to raise a large sum of money quickly. You know, if you want to build a factory, that's nice, but it takes some money to buy the land and to, you know, to build the factory and get the machines and so forth. By corporations, you could sell shares of stock and have that money up front and be able to do it. And the rule of the court system and the marketplace back then was caveat emptor. Now, I know we have some Latin speakers here. Anybody recall what caveat emptor means? Let the buyer beware. So back then, if you bought something and you took it home and it didn't work, too bad. You took it home and you tried it, worse yet, let's say it blew up in your face and blinded you, too bad. If you're a worker and you're working in a factory and you're, you know, you lose an arm because of a machine, too bad. The owner, the manufacturer, the vendor had no legal liability to either the workers or to the public at large. So that was a great godsend for the industrialists because they, you know, they didn't have to worry whether people got hurt or killed. When railroads were becoming popular, everybody wanted to ride on the railroad and they wanted to go fast. You know, Americans have always wanted to drink and we've always wanted to go fast. Those are two of our core beliefs down through the centuries. So in those early railroads, there were a lot of derailments and, you know, a lot of tunnels would collapse, a lot of bridges would collapse, a lot of people were killed on those early railroads. Too bad. You know, the railroad owners were not held accountable for that. The idea with caveat emptor was you know, you decided to work there, you bought the ticket, you know, you agreed to use that tool, that, you know, you assume more responsibility. And of course, high tariffs, which we were talking about. You know, Americans may not like necessarily what you're producing, but they can't afford to buy the foreign goods because there's such a high tax on them. They'll buy American-made. And of course, credit was very easy because there were a lot of banks. Not all were very carefully managed, but there were banks. You could always find some place willing to loan you money. Might have been for an astronomical interest rate, but you know, you could get money. So corporations allow capital formation. Now there are depressions. You know, free market enterprise. You know, Wall Street is never going to be a straight line. It's always going to be up and down, and that was the case back then. Okay, but by 1900, corporations are responsible for 2/3 of national production. So they weren't 2/3 of all companies, but they were 2/3 of all production because they were big. All right. Through trust and holding company Standard Oil, led by John D. Rockefeller, controlled 84% of oil production by 1898. Now, he controlled it both horizontally and vertically. What I mean by that is, vertically, you know, he pumped the oil out of the ground, and he refined it, and he sent it to the gas stations. He controlled it from coming out of the ground into your tank. And horizontally means he had the gas stations, too. So, you know, he put together an incredible empire. Here's what Rockefeller would do. Let's say there was a local gas company that was selling gas for maybe 5 cents a gallon. Rockefeller would open up a Standard Oil branch in that community and start selling gas for 3 cents a gallon. And of course, the local company can't afford to sell it for that low, and they'd be driven out of business. Now, what do you suppose is going to happen to their price once the local competition's gone? Oh, yeah. So Rockefeller, yeah, if you like him, you could say he was a baron of industry and he was smart business-wise, but you could also say that a lot of his tactics and methods, you know, weren't very ethical. But ethics wasn't the main, you know, concern, I think, at this point. Social Darwinism. Here's an interesting concept. It was also very popular. Okay, let me give this a shot here. I can see the screen out from under me and me falling right on my rear end in front of everybody. I feel like I'm in a high chair. Yeah, I think that'll be better. Thank you. Yeah. Much better. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
So now, you want to hold it or do you want to stand?
I'll try holding it for a while.
Sure.
Yeah. How's this, all right? Okay. Let's see what social Darwinism is. It's based on the ideas, of course, of Charles Darwin, the great natural scientist. You know, Darwin had said it's a struggle to survive, you know, only the strong do survive and so forth. But he said repeatedly this was not to be applied to human society. Humans were morally advanced beyond this, according to Darwin. Well, people did take Darwin's ideas, and they did apply them to the human race. So social Darwinists believed that a self-made wealthy individual was a fantastic person. Here's somebody with more intelligence, somebody who worked harder, somebody with more ambition, who showed more initiative, more talent. This person, generated this great wealth through their own ability. There's somebody to look up to. So you should admire the self-made wealthy. And you should not tax or regulate them. According to a social Darwinist, why would you take money from the productive and turn around and give it to the non-productive, via welfare? So social Darwinists did not like taxes, they didn't like regulation, and they certainly hated welfare. They thought the self-made wealthy were natural-born leaders, a natural aristocracy, if you will, and they deserved to keep their wealth. So if you want to have an interesting party, invite some social Darwinists and then also invite some communists, and the fruit would fly. Okay. Herbert Spencer coined this term. William Graham Sumner was an American social Darwinist. Sumner thought that these self-made wealthy should also have the political power. He said, you look at politicians today, they get elected because they shake a lot of hands, they kiss a lot of babies, they go to a lot of bar mitzvahs and a lot of first communions, but, they don't know anything about succeeding, they don't know anything about getting anything done. Power should be in the hands of people who've accomplished things, who've proven through their accomplishments that they can do things. So this is what Sumner believed, that social Darwinists should not only be allowed to keep their money, but they should have political power as well. Thomas Malthus was an English social Darwinist. He said because of the voracity of the human sexual appetite, there'd always be more people than there would be food to feed those people. So there's always going to be starvation, according to Malthus. And since that's always going to be the case, why, again, take money from the productive to give to the non-productive? There's always going to be poor people. There's always going to be hungry people. Welfare makes no sense. You're rewarding people for being failures, according to Malthus. Some people think that's a pretty bitter pill to swallow, but this is what Malthus espoused. Let's see. So there are some others as well, but those were some of the leading social Darwinists. And that was a fairly popular belief. And again, like manifest destiny, I'm not sure it's ever entirely disappeared among some circles. I won't say anything about current political situation here. Okay. David Ricardo, no relation to Ricky, was also good. You got that. Nowadays, when I tell that joke in class, everybody just kind of looks at me like, "What? Ricky Ricardo? Who's he?" We know who Ricky was, right? Well, David Ricardo, despite his last name, is actually Scottish, and he came up with something he called the iron law of wages. And according to Ricardo, it didn't make any sense to raise workers' wages, because if you do that, they're going to breed like bunny rabbits, and there's going to be a whole lot more workers, but the number of jobs will be about the same. And within a generation, you're going to have a lot more workers competing for about the same number of jobs, which is going to drive wages right back down again, probably lower than they were before, so you have more people in misery, according to Ricardo. Now, that was based on a whole bunch of assumptions, which many people would dispute, but that's, in the crux what he was speaking of. Okay, laissez-faire economics was popular back then. It's this idea that government should leave business alone. So again, if you're Roy Rockefeller, if you're a Carnegie, if you're Harvey Firestone, if you're Commodore Vanderbilt, whatever it is that you're building or selling, you're not going to be burdened down with a lot of regulations, a lot of rules, because the idea was government should just pretty much leave you alone. The hidden hand should be allowed to work, as Adam Smith would say. So that's laissez-faire economics. Now, on the other hand, they didn't seem to mind very much when government gave them subsidies. And railroads sure didn't mind at all when Congress gave them free land. Okay? But whenever somebody tried to tax them or regulate them, then they screamed about laissez-faire. Just leave us alone. That's what Adam Smith, the great economist, said. That's what we believe. They wanted to be free of the burdensome side of government intervention, but they liked all the goodies they could get, which I guess is everybody. Was it that way pretty much? Okay, big business fought regulation. They didn't want any help for unions. They saw unions as being communism. They thought that union organizers were a bunch of anarchists. They didn't want to be told by union, how much they're going to pay their workers and so forth. Accordingly, unions are very weak during this time period. Remember, the courts here are favoring caveat emptor, aren't they? And it's a time of property rights. And union organizers just couldn't get very far in the courts or on the streets, for that matter. So it's tough. And as we said, glad to accept tax breaks and subsidies, but they didn't want to pay any taxes or have any regulations. They want to have their cake and eat it too. We're kind of like that, are we not, with what $30 trillion national debt? We want government goodies. We just don't want to pay taxes to pay for those goodies. And it was no different back then. Okay, you have a lot of new immigrants coming to the country as the 19th century progresses. These are from Eastern and Southern Europe, arriving in large numbers. Many are Catholic, and some are Jewish, and some Muslim. And this is changing the face of America. There's going to be some friction because America is changing, and many people don't like change, especially if they thought they were on top before this change occurred. Put this in perspective. In 1860, again, the last census, before the war, the Catholic population among the native white population was about 1%. So it was small, influential, but small. But in the years afterwards, starting to grow very quickly. You have millions of Irish. At some point, there were more Irish in New York City than in Belfast. And, so a lot of Irish, a lot of Southern Germans, Poles. And of course, the very first Catholics were the Spaniards and Mexicans, right? In the 1500s, were here before the United States was here. So, it's evolving. We see some changes here. The Brooklyn Bridge is a great piece of infrastructure that's built. Jane Addams establishes the first settlement house in Chicago in 1886. 1893, the Chicago World's Fair had the very first Ferris wheel. And I have to digress here just a little bit. My grandfather attended that World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. That's how old I am. And I remember him telling me about that Ferris wheel. That thing was so big, it had little buildings instead of just seats on it. And you could see, I think he said 3, maybe 4 states from up there on a clear day. And he said when he rode on it, somebody got sick and regurgitated, and they're all stuck there, and they felt like getting sick too, because they couldn't go anywhere. But that was a huge Ferris wheel, and I don't think, anybody would be allowed to make one that big, at least not in the United States anymore. Okay. There are race riots, tragically. Blacks are starting to move to the north. This will take off in a larger rate later on. But, desperately trying to escape sharecropping, trying to escape the Jim Crow laws and so forth, moving into what previously had been white neighborhoods, so there are clashes. And these race riots primarily were white police and white individuals attacking black neighborhoods. So, not exactly the same as what we think of as race riots today, but that tension was there, no doubt about it. By 1920, again, I'm getting ahead of the story here, finally a majority of the population lives in cities. So this industrialization, this urbanization was going full steam in 1870s, and by 1920 it's recognized in the census. By the way, how would you like to cross that street? A little baseball trivia. Okay, I can't help myself. The Los Angeles Dodgers weren't always the Los Angeles Dodgers. They were the Brooklyn Dodgers, God rest their souls. And the way they got that name was back in the old Brooklyn days. If you're trying to cross the street, you better be pretty good at dodging. You had to dodge hoof traffic, you had to dodge other people, you had to dodge carts, you had to dodge these automobiles, and you had to dodge the trolley cars. In fact, that's the original name of the team, the Trolley Dodgers, eventually shortened to Dodgers. So the Dodgers moved on, but they kept the name. So, yeah. It's like Los Angeles' basketball team is the Los Angeles Lakers. They weren't always the Los Angeles Lakers. They were the Minneapolis Lakers. And that made sense in Minneapolis, doesn't it? The land of 1,000 lakes. There are no lakes in Los Angeles. But again, they just kept the name. Oh, that's my clever sound effects. We're talking about these industrialists. I put in some cash register sounds here for you. Americans have a great taste for meat, and so cattle in the West is being driven eastward to the slaughterhouses in Chicago, and they developed these refrigeration cars to help transport the meat. Back then, meat that you bought at a butcher shop could be sort of iffy. Have any of you ever read the book The Jungle? Upton Sinclair was trying to write a book that would convince people to become socialist, but when he described the methods that these slaughterhouses employed, it just made people ill, and it almost killed off the meat packaging industry. So it was actually the meat industry that pushed for things like the Pure Food and Drug Act to try to get the public's confidence back. But the author described things such as, dead rats being scraped off the floor and thrown into the grinders, or people having their fingers severed and that becoming part of somebody's bologna or something. I know. You're all going to be vegetarians now, right? But there's progress being made, but still not very clean process. A man named Frederick Taylor came up with something called scientific management. There was a lot of problems among workers and management. In addition to race problems, there were also problems in the workplace. And Taylor thought if workers just made more money, they'd be happy. He thinks the only thing that motivates workers is a bigger paycheck. So he's thinking, okay, we're going to tie their pay into their production. So if they produce more, they'll get paid more, and they'll be happy. So one thing scientific management did was it broke these jobs down in very simple components. So before this, let's say you were a cobbler and you made shoes. You know how to make a good pair of shoes from start to finish. You knew every one of those steps. After scientific management, your job's broken down to pushing one button or moving one thing off a belt and putting on another belt. That's all you do over and over and over again. So scientific management did lead to more production and more pay for the workers, but it paid for incredibly boring work. That's what it helped generate, and a lot of dissatisfaction. And this belief that workers are motivated only by money, proved to be not true. You want quality of employment as well. Can you imagine doing the same thing 3,000 times? Okay. By the way, I used to be a time and motion studies analyst, a time and motion study analyst. I would time workers with stop clocks and set rates on them and that sort of thing. I was very popular. Yeah, people liked me quite a bit. I'd show up and people would go hide in the bathroom until I left, but that was part of, scientific management. You would set rates on people, and if you produce above that rate, you make more money. You might be producing crummy parts that nobody can use, but you're getting more. Okay, the National Labor Union was the first attempt at, you guessed it, a National Labor Union, but it died in the 1870s as a result of a recession that we had. Tragically, when times get bad economically, a lot of workers, first thing they would cut would be their union dues, because they couldn't afford to pay them. And the union was the one thing that was working for them. But unfortunately, that killed off the National Labor Union. Okay, let's try that again. There we go. Another early labor organization was the Knights of Labor, led by a man named Terence Powderly. But this organization didn't succeed either. Powderly made some basic mistakes. He tried to bring almost everybody into his union. Even bosses could be in the union. And he tried to concentrate on all kinds of things, pay and working conditions and child care and all sorts of things at once. He's kind of like a pinball in a pinball machine. Ding, 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 ding. And he didn't like strikes. So if you own a company and you're negotiating with a Knights of Labor union, why would you listen to them? You think they're not going to go on strike? Who cares what they think? If they quit, I'll get more people in to replace them. So it's going to be an organization which had a lot of problems and ultimately didn't survive. It's going to be replaced by an organization that was much better planned and much better thought out, and that was this, the American Federation of Labor, led by a man named Samuel Gompers. Now, if you've ever seen a picture of Gompers, he looks like a union leader. If you try to imagine a stereotypical one, he's short, he's pugnacious, his lower lip sticks out over his top lip, he's got a cigar in his mouth, somebody you don't want to mess with. And Gompers was smart. He learned from mistakes of the Knights. So, with him, there's going to be one union per industry, and he's going to concentrate on things that people are interested in. Pay and hours. That's it. All the other stuff can wait. And he kept the AFL politically neutral. It was not in the hip pocket of either major party. Gomper said, we have permanent interest. We don't necessarily have permanent friends or enemies. So if you want our vote, come talk to us. Today, most unions, are closely affiliated with the Democratic Party, so there's no real incentive for Democrats to reach out to them and no incentive for Republicans to even try. But, this fellow, Gompers, kept them politically neutral, which is probably a pretty smart idea. And, of course, at first, he only organized skilled workers. Now, if you folks are working for me and you're broom pushers and you go on strike, like I said, I'm going to fire you and replace you with people off the street. But let's say you're electricians and you go on strike. Uh-oh, I better listen to you. I can't find a bunch of electricians off the street to replace you. So Gompers is smart. He's only representing the skilled laborers at first. It gave him automatic bargaining power. Okay, I need to move on here. So there's Gompers for you. I wouldn't want to look across the table and see that fellow. Okay, a lot of problems here, but I don't think we have time to go into a lot of labor history. May I ask what time it is? I don't have a...
20.
Okay.
About 20 minutes.
To go? Okay, so I need to wrap this up and get into German history. Okay. U.S. politics in the 1870s, the presidential elections were close, but the Republicans won. From the time James Buchanan, our all-time best president, left office in 1861 until Grover Cleveland came in 1885, all Republican presidents. 24 years of republicanism. Sometimes the elections were close, sometimes they weren't, but Republicans were in control. Because most northern voters associate the Democratic Party with the war and the secession and so forth. So it's going to be a while. Democrats are doing better at the state and local level, though. Okay. Republican positions, they do want the high tariffs. They represent the business classes. They want hard money, which means they don't want inflation. They want money to be under reasonable control. You see, a lot of poor people back then did want inflation. The idea being, I'm so poor, I want as much money in circulation as possible, including lots of paper money, in the hope that some of that might filter down to me. But the Republicans represented bankers and so forth, and they wanted hard money. They wanted to be paid back in money that had the same purchasing value as the money they loaned out in the first place. So they want high tariffs, they want hard money, they want a stronger military, they want laissez-faire economics, and they seem to work for them pretty well. Now in 1877, Reconstruction came to an abrupt end. We have a new president, a man named Rutherford B. Hayes. He had won the election under very dubious circumstances, and supposedly there was a deal struck to allow the Democrats to accept Hayes as president. Now, Hayes never said any such deal was ever agreed to, but here were the terms. The Republicans allegedly promised they'd put a Democrat in the cabinet, okay, and that they would use federal money to rebuild the South, and that they would pull federal troops out of the South. Now, Hayes, again, said there was no such deal, but while he was president, he signed a bill which called for the paying of federal money to rebuild the South, and he did put a Southerner in his cabinet, and he did pull the federal troops out. And that was an abject disaster for African Americans. Overnight, they were left to the mercy of whites who weren't feeling merciful toward them. And, I think if they could have reestablished slavery, they would have. They did the next best thing, and very harsh. Overnight, the Reconstruction governments fell, and, that was it. So people who thought that the war would lead to a time of brotherhood in America were wrong. It did end to the end of secession. It led to the end of slavery, but in race relations, not much progress at all for another 100 years. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there, and I hope you enjoyed that. So when you think of the 1870s, America is growing very rapidly. We're urbanizing. We're becoming an industrial powerhouse, and politically largely under the control of the Republican Party, but there's starting to appear some cracks in that. Okay, any questions? So I did so well that you're just mesmerized. Okay, thank you. Can we move on to the one about German? Well, aren't you anticipatory? Good job. When you talk about Germany in the 1870s, this is the name you're going to be talking about. First off, let's look at this term Germany, okay? Before 1870, there was no one country called Germany. There were many, many smaller German states. Germany had not been a unified country since the time of Charlemagne, 1,000 years before. There was a German language, there was a German culture, a German people, German cities, German folklore, but no Germany. So there were two powerhouse German states here that were trying to do something about that. One was the Austrian-Hungarian Empire in the southern part, led by the Habsburg family, ruling out of Vienna. The Habsburgs had a huge empire already put together, and they very much wanted the North German states to be part of it. So there's one competitor. Vienna and the Habsburgs wants all of Germany. The other competitor was a North German state that was very much different from Austria-Hungary, and this is Prussia. Prussia was Lutheran and very militaristic, led by the Junker class, Junker. Prussia was known for its military schools, for its superior weaponry, for its aggressiveness, and Prussia is led by a man named Otto von Bismarck, who was the chancellor. He's called the Iron Chancellor, old blood and iron. Bismarck is a nationalist. He wants Germany, but he wants it under Prussian control, and he's going to do what's necessary. And here's what I find so amazing about Otto von Bismarck. This guy would have been a great poker player. He knew exactly what had to be done to bring about German unification. He realized it would take a series of 3 wars to do this. So he planned each war out meticulously. He knew when it would start, he knew how long it would take Prussia to win, and then he knew he had to fight next. And he, after defeating Denmark, he knew he was going to have to fight Austria and later France. And in both those cases, the Prussian War and the French War, he manipulated the Austrians and the French into declaring war on Prussia to make Prussia look like the innocent party. Like, we've done nothing. Why are you attacking us? Because, again, Germany was divided. Northern Germany was Lutheran. Southern Germany was largely Catholic. And Bismarck was concerned that if Prussia looked like the aggressor, in these wars against Austria and France, the South Germans might fight with their co-religionists and abandon their fellow Germans. So Bismarck is determined that, when he fights Austria, and then later after he defeats them, they fight the French, he's going to have to manipulate it so both the Austrians and the French declare war on Prussia to make them look like the aggressors, and he did it. So let's look first at these three wars. First one's against Denmark. You might wonder, why does Prussia have to fight Denmark, for German unification? Well, part of it is Denmark had some land that Prussia wanted, 2 provinces, Schleswig and Holstein, so that was part of it. But there was something else at play here. He wanted to gain Austria's trust. He had to get them thinking that they were on the same level here. So Bismarck told the Austrians, if you join us in this war against Denmark, I'm going to make sure you get some of this Danish territory. And he knew the Habsburgs would go for that. They're always looking for ways to expand. So they said, yeah. So they joined the Germans, and together they waged war on hapless Denmark. And of course, in a few weeks, the Danes were defeated. But then Bismarck made sure that the Austrians were denied the part of Denmark they thought they were going to get. So now the Austrians are outraged. They said, look, we joined you in this war, and we did this on the belief that we're going to get X amount of lands. You've given us just a little here, but not really what we asked for. Bismarck didn't respond to them, so in outrage, the Austrians declared war, just as Bismarck knew they would do. And Austria was defeated in a matter of weeks. Prussia wasn't a large country yet, but like I said, they had the best soldiers, they had the best officers, they had the best weapons, they had the most discipline. They weren't somebody to be crossed. I kind of like what Winston Churchill said about Prussia once. He said it's an army in search of a country. And, the Prussians were tough. So now, when this war broke out, the South Germans, even though they were Catholic, fought with Prussia, and Austria was quickly defeated. Now he's going to have to deal with France. Okay, so France is very leery. I think the French realize that, they're not in a very safe situation here. Well, here's how this came about. There was a vacancy on the throne to Spain. The Emperor of France at that time was Napoleon III. And Napoleon III told King William of Prussia, do not put a Hohenzollern, in other words a German, on the throne of Spain. We don't want to be surrounded on all sides by the German royal family. So William, the king, wrote out a very nice response that he wouldn't do that, but Bismarck got his hand on that before it got mailed, and he rewrote it to make it sound insulting. And Napoleon III, being Napoleon III, when he read that, he was all outraged, rashly declared war on Prussia, exactly as Bismarck knew that he would do. And within a matter of a short period of time, France was defeated as well. Now, Bismarck is pragmatic. I think he would have been Machiavelli's hero. When he defeats Austria, he gave the Austrians fairly generous terms because he wanted Austria as an ally down the road. But France, he thought, there's an enemy. We're never going to be able to placate these people, so we're going to put it to them here. So he took a good chunk of French land, especially 2 provinces that the French hated losing, Alsace and Lorraine, and he hit the French with huge indemnities they had to pay. And to make sure they got paid, the German army is going to stay in Paris until they do get paid. So Bismarck saw this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to so weaken France that it couldn't do anything in the future to hurt the Germans. And then he did one little last thing to kind of rub the French nose in all this. He declared the creation of the new German Empire, in January 1871, but not back in Berlin, but in Versailles, the old French capital city right outside Paris, where Louis XIV used to live. That's where the German coronation ceremony was. So just one last little reminder of the French, who's the top dog and who isn't. So now Bismarck had what he wanted, a unified Germany under Prussian control. King William of Prussia becomes Kaiser Wilhelm I of the new German Empire. Berlin becomes the new German capital city. And overnight you have a gigantic power right there in the center part of Europe. And people are scared. The French are frightened to death and want revenge. And other countries are fearful of what this new Germany is going to be like. Its history so far is one of aggression, and it's very, very powerful. Germany also becomes a major industrial power during the 1870s. So the United States and Prussia are the 2 new leaders in that category. And it's scary. When Bismarck looks at the map, he sees Russia to the east. Now, he doesn't think the Russians are very strong, and at that point they weren't. The Russians are backwards, they're illiterate, they're superstitious, they're still in the Middle Ages under the Tsars in many respects. So Russia's not really a threat, but he wanted to keep an alliance with it just so they didn't go over to the French. And in Austria, he rebuilt fences as he foresaw, and Austria became an ally. He kept England placated by being on good terms with the English. The French, he just realized that's never going to happen. We're going to have to keep the French under control. So what he did is, after Germany became one nation, he isolated the French diplomatically. He looked around all the countries that might ally themselves with the French, and he got there first with alliances.
So the French don't have any outside powers here really to help them either. And so very interesting story here. Now, two spots remain a problem. One is, of course, France. You know, Bismarck is doing all that he can to keep the French weak and not a problem. But he knows their hatred is deep, and it'll always be a sore spot. But the other big problem area was the Balkans, down in southeastern Europe. Then you have the Ottoman Empire, you know, this Turkish empire, but it's slowly disintegrating. And there's a power vacuum down there in southeastern Europe. And what does nature say about a vacuum? Somebody's going to fill it, right? The Russians wanted to be the top dog in southeast Europe, and so did the Austrians. The trouble is Germany is allied with both of them. So that's going to be kind of a trouble spot that Bismarck's keeping an eye out for. But anyway, you know, Bismarck, he was a warrior, but just for as long as it took to create a unified, modern, new German empire. Once that happened, he kind of changed his tune here, and now he's kind of wanting peace because he's trying to protect what he's just created. Okay. So I kind of lost track of this, sorry about that. Bismarck is determined, he's conniving, he's duplicitous, he's intelligent. He plans a series of wars step by step to bring about German unification and oppression, not Austrian control. So he pulled it off. You know, like Bismarck or not like him, that was an amazing, almost unbelievable accomplishment on his part. Notice the explosions and the cannonballs and so forth. He's appointed chancellor. As I said, he's a strong supporter of the Prussian, later the German monarchy. He's from the younger class. He wanted to increase territory and prestige of Prussia and, of course, preserve monarchical power. Okay, so this is all about the wars which we were just discussing, so I'm going to kind of like fast forward through this. Okay, after 1871, Imperial Germany is created. Overnight, a new major power is created. Russia, France, England, Austria, Turkey, all concerned about this. Now that unification is achieved, the new goal is peace because that seems the best way to protect Germany. Again, he sees two trouble spots, as you said, France to the west, and of course down there in southeastern Europe. Who's going to fill that power vacuum? He doesn't necessarily want that area, but he doesn't want his two allies, Russia and Austria, fighting over it either. So that's something that's going to have to be dealt with. Okay, ongoing German growth in industry and armaments reconciles with Austria, isolates and suppresses France. Neutrality with England plays Austria and Russia against each other, just basically trying to maintain peace down there in the Balkans. All right, let's look at his domestic programs. He's really sharp, Bismarck. Guess what was the first European power to ever offer insurance for sickness insurance for workers? Yeah, it was Germany, right, under Bismarck. Unemployment compensation, retirement pay. This is from Imperial Germany. You'd think this would be from, like Sweden or someplace, but this was Bismarck. You don't think of him as being a friend to the poor, a friend to the working class, but he did it. Now, did he do it because he was Mr. Nice Guy? No. He's trying to buy the German workers off, isn't he? They're not likely to become anarchists or communists or socialists or, oppose him if they're getting a check every month. So pretty smart on his part. He did that. He placates industrialists with nonstop militarization. There's always contracts for them. So he looks at all the forces in Germany that might be the threat, and he's trying to deal with them. So he's bought off the workers, and he thinks he's bought off the industrialists. He sees one other possible threat here, and that's the Catholic Church. And Bismarck, I truly don't believe that in his heart he hated Catholics or Catholicism, but he did see the power of the church was the international power as a threat to the new German monarchy, and that was nearest and dearest to him. Plus, he was Protestant. So he knows that if he comes right out and says, okay, Catholicism is hereby illegal, he's going to have a revolt on his hands and he may not be able to manage. So he takes gradual steps here. He begins closing, the private schools. So he removes the Jesuits from Germany, and doing what he can to try to cut back on the power of the Catholic Church. And he is not really a successful. Okay. Yes. Oh.
That one's starting to cut out.
Okay. Thank you. Is this one on?
Yes.
I want to sing right now. I want to do karaoke or something, but I won't. I'll do my melody of Buddy Holly's Greatest Hits here for you someday. But, okay, so Bismarck sees the Catholic Church as a threat. And again, he's smart enough not to say, I'm going to get rid of Catholicism, but he's trying to do what he can to do away with the power of the church. But it doesn't seem to be working. The church counterattacks, if you will. They go underground. They move across borders. They're still largely doing what they'd been doing before, just not being real public about it. And Bismarck learns the more that he goes after the institutionalized power of the church, the stronger it seems to get, and the more of a bully it makes him look. So eventually, after trying unsuccessfully to limit its power in the 1870s on in the 1880s, he reins back the suppression and allows it to operate openly again, and he allows Catholics greater input into political parties. I think basically he's just saying, if you'll pay your taxes and obey the law, then be Catholic and listen to the Pope. He had just thought that it would be a threat to the German monarchy. I don't think it really was as much as he thought it was. And I think, he's a practical man. And I think he eventually just realized this isn't working, and it's making the clerical forces look like victims, and me look like a terrible person. So he reined it back in. Another good thing, about Bismarck's perception, he knew when something wasn't working. If you're a teacher and you have several things you want to do during a class period and something's working, you probably go with that longer, maybe the whole period. If it's not, you go to plan B, whatever that happens to be. Bismarck was like that as well. He's a very shrewd, very pragmatic man. The point is, he built this great new German powerhouse, this new German empire, the Second Reich, if you will. And he created it, he made it strong, he made it safe. But in 1888, there's a new Kaiser. The old Kaiser dies. Kaiser Wilhelm II comes to the power. And this guy is a real piece of work. Kaiser Wilhelm II is bombastic. He's aggressive. He is jealous of Bismarck's influence and power. In 1890, he forces Bismarck into retirement. And then Kaiser Wilhelm set about, unknowingly, I think, destroying everything that Bismarck had created. For example, it does. This new Kaiser, let the treaty with Russia fall by the wayside because he didn't think the Russians mattered one way or the other. The French immediately got with the Russians and created an alliance, which guaranteed if there's another war, Germany's going to have to fight a two-front war, thanks to that. And then the new Kaiser, Wilhelm II, said that Germany is going to build the strongest navy in the world. How do you think the English felt about that? They're thinking, no, you're not. So he unnecessarily started an arms race with the English. Now remember, who was Kaiser Wilhelm's grandmother? She was the mother of all royal families in Europe, Queen Victoria. Victoria's oldest daughter had married the German king, and so Kaiser Wilhelm II's grandmother was Queen Victoria of England. So you'd think that the English and the Germans would have a close relationship. No, he antagonized the British by saying he's going to build this great navy. Now, if you're Germany, let me ask this question. Where are you going to put a navy? Yeah, are you on the Atlantic? No. Pacific? No. Mediterranean? No. North Sea, maybe the Baltic. You have a few ports up there which are frozen over half the year. There's no reason for him to do this. He just seemed to go out of his way to antagonize them. And his strongest allies, he often seemed to be, what's the term I'm looking for, dismissive of. And, all the brains that Bismarck showed, this fellow showed the opposite. So if you're a German, this is a tragic situation. This empire that Bismarck had so painstakingly put together in 1870 is only going to be around for 48 years. Because the end of the First World War in 1918, which this Kaiser had helped start, the empire collapsed. So, but in reference to the culture conf, the empire fell, and obviously the church survived, as it always does. Any questions about our German friends there? Yes.
I want to make a comment. Part of my family got out of there when this guy got in. So it must have been around, 1890?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the new Kaiser comes to the throne in 1888. 2 years later, he kicks Bismarck out in 1890. A classic mistake. Bismarck had put all these precautions in place. He was smart. He had Germany well protected. And it was almost like Kaiser Wilhelm II did everything he possibly could think of to do to undo all that, to the dismay of Germans in the world. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's try.
I think we're in awe of the wealth of information that you've shared with us this afternoon, and I'm sure there are more questions as we sit and kind of process what we've heard. So can you take a few questions for the next couple minutes? We do have some time for questions. So anyone have?
What happened in Austria? You know, the Austrian country, and then right when this second Wilhelm got in there.
Well, they had an alliance. Wilhelm II wanted to keep that alliance. Thank you. But here's what happens. 1914, remember, Austria-Hungary was a polyglot empire. Had a lot of Serbs, had a lot of Czechs and Croats and Jews. It wasn't just German. It was a very polyglot. And in 1908, the Austrians had taken a territory called Bosnia, which largely was not Catholic and largely Slavic. And most Bosnians didn't want to be part of Austria-Hungary. Well, June 24th, 1914, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand Habsburg, and his wife Sophie came to visit Bosnia. And part of it was to get Sophie out of the capital city. She was a Serb herself. And back in Vienna, she was never treated as an equal with her husband, always forced to ride behind and that sort of thing. So he took her to Sarajevo in Bosnia so she could be treated equally with him. This was their wedding anniversary. And he also wanted to send a message to the Bosnians that once he became emperor, they would be treated equally. They'd be treated just as well as the Austrians and the Hungarians. You know, the Slavic people would be on an equal par. So Franz Ferdinand really thought this was a good thing that he was doing. But many Bosnians resented him as the heir to the throne. They didn't want to be part of Austria-Hungary. And there was a terrorist group called the Black Hand, which was waiting for him. So when he showed up there, June 28th, 1914, there was an attempt on his life. Somebody threw a grenade at the procession. Now this failed, so they went on to the town hall, and there the Archduke made a short address. But they had to figure out what to do. They're thinking that there's one assassin out there, there's probably others. Maybe we should just get back to the imperial train and get out of here. So they agreed that's what they're going to do. So everybody was towed except the chauffeur of the Archduke's car. So they start the procession again, and this chauffeur turns the way that he's originally scheduled to turn. And by the time they chase him down, you know, hey, Doomkopf, you're going the wrong way. He stops in front of a cafe where the last assassin happened to be sitting. And he'd heard the first attempt had failed. He thought he wouldn't have an opportunity. But suddenly, just 10 feet in front of him, in an open car with almost no protection, was the Archduke and his wife Sophie. This man's name was Gavrilo Princip. And he ran up, jumped on the running board, and fired 2 shots into the back seat, meaning to hit the Archduke with both of them. But his arm was jostled, and he shot the Archduke, and he also shot Sophie. And they were both dead within minutes. And this was a crisis. You know, this was the heir to the throne. And, the old emperor, Franz Joseph, wanted to crush Serbia. So he sent them an ultimatum, which they couldn't really accept. Here's the deal. The Austrians knew that Serbia was actually behind this. It happened in Bosnia, but he knew that the Black Hand was a Serbian group, and they're behind the assassination. And Austria wanted to crush Serbia, so here's a chance to do it. So he sent the Serbians an ultimatum saying, straighten up, or, they have to agree to our terms. But he knew that, they couldn't agree to these terms. And the Kaiser, here's where he jumps in, never saw a war he didn't like. He told Vienna, if you play tough with these Serbs, I'll stand right beside you, and we'll teach those Serbs a lesson. So, when Serbia, doesn't look like it's going to accept that ultimatum, war appears to be imminent. Now, the Tsar, Nicholas II, God rest his soul, in many ways a good man, but a terrible leader. Russia had been humiliated many times, so the Tsar thought, I have to act tough this time. So he sent his troops out on the border with both Austria and Germany. Remember, Russia is allied with Serbia. It's another Slavic country, just like they are. So here you have Germany and Austria, 2 Germanic countries threatening Serbia, which is obviously Slavic. Russia considers itself the big brother to all Slavic states, so he mobilizes, the Tsar mobilizes, right on the border of Germany and Austria. Now guess who else is related? Kaiser Wilhelm II and Nicholas II of Russia were cousins as well. So, Willie sends Nicky a telegram, that's what they used to call each other, basically saying, Nicky, what are you thinking? You can't have your troops on my border. You need to get those out of there within 2 days or I'm going to have to declare war. Nicholas doesn't know what to do. He's thinking, I can't back down again. Russia always backs down. I have to act tough. He can't make up his mind. And sadly, the time period goes by, and on August 3rd, 1914, Germany declared war on Russia. And Austria and Serbia were already at war. So we stepped into a heck of a mess here.
There's old film clips, you might watch these sometimes, of the capital cities in July and August 1914 when the war declarations are being read. They're delighted. People are out there, girls are kissing the soldiers and they're throwing rose petals and the band is playing. Everybody thinks it's a wonderful thing. We're going to war. And they must have thought this war was going to last about a week and their side was going to win and double its population and get all this glory. They apparently had no idea on earth what they were just stepping into. And when I think about this whole mess, I very much regret, in fact, I've had tears come to my eyes on more than one occasion, that there wasn't somebody there someplace, some great diplomat, some great leader who might have said, let's all take a step backwards. Everybody take a deep breath. Let's weigh and measure things very carefully here. Let's think about this. But that wasn't the case in the first week of August, 1914. And by the time people realized what a nightmare this was going to be, it was too late. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yes.
I got it.
Okay.
You can keep this.
Do you see any relationship between the great influx of immigrants around 1870 in that time, in relationship to Bismarck and the Kulturkampf?
I do. It takes a lot of courage, a lot of motivation to leave your own country. That's the world that you're used to, and it may be flawed, but it's home. So if people are leaving their country to come to the United States, I think they must be pretty objectively miserable, And I think a lot of the immigrants coming to the United States back in the 1870s were. They were trying to escape political oppression, czars and kaisers and emperors and kings. They wanted economic opportunity. They wanted a better life for their children. It sounds to me exactly what immigrants today are looking for. I don't think it's changed one iota as far as I can tell. And then as now there are people who open their arms to immigrants, and there's those who said, build the fences. Sister Judith?
Could you talk about what was the welcome that the German immigrants received back in?
From into America? Yeah. Germans didn't face the degree of hostility that other immigrant groups did. I've never understood to this day why people are so down on the Irish, for example. But the Germans are very, very hardworking people, and I think that was something which most native-born Americans appreciated, and family-oriented, and so I'm sure as immigrants they faced some amount of ethnocentrism that's always there, some degree of xenophobia, irrational fear and hatred of immigrants at all. But I think the Germans probably blended in a little bit more easily than other groups did. I'm from southern Indiana, Evansville. You can't get much more southern than being Indiana, right, than Evansville. And there's a large German population down there, a lot of German names for the streets and the neighborhoods and so forth. And I think a lot of them just came from the Ohio River, and came that way. And, as I said, very industrious people, church-going, proud of their heritage and so forth, but also willing to accept American beliefs and so forth. And, I think that's something we lose track of. Okay, I'm going to digress a little. People come to the United States today and they don't know English. Well, immigrants down through history, when they first go to a new place, don't know the language. There's nothing new about that. The Germans who first came here didn't learn English immediately. And a lot of times grandma and grandpa and mom and dad struggled with it, but the kids picked it up. And in a few generations they had it, and they were very much part of America. So I sometimes think we should read our history books a little bit more carefully, and try to actually pick up a little more than we do.
Other questions?
Thank you, sister.
Again, I want to say thank you to Dr. Buchanan for the wonderful, yes.
Hello, my name is Ulrich Keller. I'm the Archivist of the Mother House in Dernbach, Westerwald, and I was asked to introduce to you this triptych, which is located in the Mother House Chapel. The Dernbach Triptych. This presentation has some goals: to identify the exemplary character of the triptych for the history of the Poor Handmaids of Jesus Christ, and also for the diocesan church history. It is to experience the eminent church political character of this type of Nazarene painting. It is to learn about the approach of the foundress, Mother Catherine Casper, of the PHJC in respect of her religious and socio-political environs, that is, age, recruitment, and label giving, thereby detecting models for effective responses to these environs in theory and practice. Our presentation has certain outcomes. It is to identify Mother Mary's position in the use of most modern technology. It asked photography. It is to reflect about the exchange between Catholic faith and the arts, here painting and photography. It is to identify, out of the interdependency between painting and photography, the specific results deriving from their relationship. And finally, it is to detect the incessant effects of the same relationship and the necessary positioning deriving from this. The historical background of this triptych. The societal background for this endeavor was rather dreary. In 1871, Chancellor Bismarck declared a cultural war. It's called the Kulturkampf. Bismarck's policies defined the interests of the Roman Catholic Church as antagonistic to the interests of the Prussian state. The main struggle lasted until 1878. It ended diplomatically in 1887. In 1875, the so-called Klostergesetz, the Congregation's law, was issued. It ordered the closure of religious houses of orders of non-health-caring orders. Others were forced to leave educational institutions or to give them up. The nursing activities were allowed to continue for the time being. In the following year, in 1876, some schools and kindergartens of the PHJC had already been closed, and some sisters were forced to leave. Some of them were transferred abroad, for example to the Netherlands. In due course, the PHJC were forbidden to take in new aspirants. Let's talk about the painter. Peter Molitor was commissioned to be the painter. He came from nearby Koblenz, where he was born in 1821, and he died in nearby Oberlandstein in 1898. His father was a master baker from the Westerwald, from Moit. He publicly professed his belief. In the chapel of Koblenz-Arnberg, he depicts himself with Simon of Cyrene carrying Christ's cross. Molitor studied from 1837 to 1838 and from 1841 to 1844 at the very famous and still now existing Düsseldorf School. The founding members of its organizational predecessor came mainly from Koblenz. Molitor was a pupil of Wilhelm Schadow, an eminent German painter, and Karl Ferdinand Sohn, a famous portraitist. Molitor studied and mainly worked in Munich, Würzburg, and Koblenz. In 1851, Molitor was asked to contribute to the paintings in the Municipal Hall of Aachen, the so-called Kaisersaal, which is in the Councillor's House. In 1856, Molitor contributes to the paintings in the chapel of Stolzenfels Castle, which is owned by the Prussian King Frederick William IV. In 1859 till 1860, Molitor moved to Düsseldorf while still engaged in projects in the Koblenz vicinity. Koblenz is accessible since 1858 via train. In the following years, he's engaged in Koblenz-Arnberg at the St. Nicholas Church. The way to the inner side leads to these two panels. Now what do we see? We see the baptism of the congregations, because the congregation is called Arme Dienstmägde Jesu Christi, poor handmaids of Jesus Christ. It's the Annunciation, celebrated on March 25th, but the traditional text is Luke 1:26 following. It says, when Mary responds to God, it says, Ecce Ancilla Domini, fiat mihi secundum verbum tuum. Ancilla, it's the marked, it's the handmaid. But instead of displaying the traditional text of Luke, the picture actually displays a different text on the text scroll, which is over here. This is a text from Misha 5.1, and Misha is a prophet in the time of struggle. It's speaking up against the oppression, and as we full know, it is the time of the cultural war. The acting agents, which is the Trinity, St. Mary, and the angel, are linked from above, which you can see when you look at the shadows. The underlying geometry of the side in viewing both panels together shows a double triangle resting on the only bridge between the two panels, the cushion. There are four major things displayed, which all will tell us certainly about the ongoing discussion within this painting. There's ruling depicted. It's via the scepter, a sign of royalty and an imperial insignia. Then there's the vessel with lily and roses in there. It gives you the idea of obeying, humility and humbleness, which are traditional symbols linked with St. Mary. The third thing, which is of major interest, is the cushion, which bridges the left to the right panel. It's a sign of humbleness and is kneeling, as it's a saying of obeying. Taking all these four things together gives us the following impression. It should tell you, keep the rule, and the rule keeps you. Now we're talking about reading the looks. It's the angel who looks at St. Mary. Now we look at the Holy Spirit, who is addressing St. Mary. As we learned, the Holy Spirit and the angel is addressing St. Mary, but Mary, she doesn't look up. What she does, she looks at the text scroll. Now we're looking at the shadow's tail. There's the shadow of St. Mary. There's the shadow of the vessel. The cushion doesn't have a shadow. There's the shadow of the stool, which goes back and which goes here. It gives the question, where's the light coming from? And the answer is, the light is coming from above, but not from inside the painting, but from the onlooker. Now, let's look at the position of the feet. Now, what we're looking at is the angel's feet. And he's now, in fact, not stepping down to St. Mary, but he's stepping towards us. Now, we're looking at the feet of St. Mary. While the right foot is pointing towards us, the left foot is pointing towards the angel. which is suggesting movement. And exactly this movement will appear when we look at the angel again. Now we're looking at the angel's standpoint and a twist of his hips. If you look closely, the angel in fact is not declining to St. Mary, but he is stepping down towards us. The Dambach Triptych, the inner panel, the complete side, structures of telling the narrative. Are we reading in sentences and therefore sinking in relations? What do we learn from that? Are there levels of conversation under the same horizon? Are there levels of conversation also regarding being on the same ground? Well, as we discussed earlier, there are sentences under which this picture has been structured, but there's no horizon in reality which links the dome of Limburg, the first little house, out of which the mother house became, and Montabaur Castle together. So we know it's purely fictitious. As on the outside panels, also in the inside panels, geometry applies, where bases here, here, and here, which points directly from the bishop to his patron. As for the left panel, the middle panel has the same geometry, with the bases here, one line going up to St. Mary and the other one going down, having the sisters, which are the important sisters at this time, including Mother Mary, under the protection and under the blessing of St. Mary. Also on the right-hand panel, also the geometry applies, the triangular. It's the bases here, pointing towards the patron of the first superior, and a line there. Again, all these three panels are matched together. When you look at the sides, Betire is looking at St. Mary. In this sentence, St. James is looking at St. Mary. On this side, St. Peter is looking at St. Mary. Here, Bishop Bloom is looking at St. Mary. There's only one person who directly addresses us, which is this person, which I will explain later. In the left panel, you see the eastern view of Limburg Cathedral. It's the seat of Bishop Bloom. On the right panel, you see the Schloss of Montabaur, which used to be the hunting seats of the old days of the former bishopric of Trier. On the left side of the middle panel, you see the so-called first house. It's the first mother house, and as it's here called, the Häuschen. On the right-hand side of the middle panel, you see the mother house as it appears to contemporary sides. Also, you see that there is a crossing of the panel from the mother house into the right panel, where you see a second chapel which is no longer there, but it has been demolished very early, and it was built by the Dambach population annexing the mother house chapel. And the centerpiece of the mother house, you see a quote from history. It's a Cistercian bell tower. The only side which appears 4 times is the so-called Mahlberg, It's an ancient Germanic side of tribunal and jurisdiction, which is here, here, and here. The complete side shows us the structures of discussion and exchange, the use of modern technology and ancient craftsman tradition. It's an exchange between the photographer Schupp from Montebauer and the Nazarene painter Molitor. Now, on which topics does the center teach us? It teaches us on photography, it teaches us on iconography, it teaches us on religious costume, and it teaches us on religious rule. 2 photos in the Mother House archives show that there must have been obviously a discussion of how to represent Mother Mary, either standing or kneeling. There's a third photo contained in the General Archives in the Mother House, which depict a different type of picture. Unified in all these pictures, as you might be aware, is the book in the hand of Mother Mary. This is a symbol for a foundress, but also, as a contemporary symbol, it says, I can read, I've got time to read, and I'm allowed to read. These things are not self-understood in this time. The decision to represent Mother Mary fell to the kneeling position. And as you might see, I just cut this out to show you, even the cord from the photo is represented in the painting. As we know from the bigger picture, Mother Mary is kneeling to the right hand of Saint Mary. Now we see right to her is the first general economist, Sister Angela Mollier Schneider-Hisken, and she was already 10 years dead when this picture was painted. And also she is represented on the right hand, which is absolutely according to the rule of the poor handmaid, which says the right hand of the general superior is the general economist. Sister Angela Mollier Schneider-Hisken had died 10 years before the picture was painted. So obviously the painter couldn't have known her, which gives a hint that this painting was made after photographies. She, as a general economist, had been called a lay sister, which a lay sister was in her time not embedded in the rule. It came later in the 1870s, only to be scrapped from the rule in the 1880s. So, the characteristics of the lay sister were they were not trained adequate to their job. They would have problems with writing, reading, calculating, and on top of it, they were normally a characteristic of a strictly cloistered community, which we all know that the poor handmaids were not a strictly cloistered community because they were looking after the ill the whole time and after the kids. Now, on top of it, when you look at her dress, it's different to all the dresses which are depicted there. Now, this dress was modeled after the contemporary dress of a Westerwald woman and was merely a fictitious dress for a sister within a monastery. And on top of it, Sister Angela had been highly trained, was a well-educated woman, and, as we full know, she was the general economist. So none of the criteria of being a lay sister would have applied to her in the first instance. Now, why was Sister Angela called a lay sister? The answer to the riddle is found on the middle panel in a different sister. This is Sister Amela. It's her daughter. Sister Angela had been married twice, widowed twice, and was the mother to a daughter, which she brought into the community, and both took the oath. On top of it, not only being the daughter of Sister Angela, Sister Ancilla had left the community in the early 1870s. So, when the picture was made in 1876, her mother had 10 years been dead, and she had left the community. Now, just imagine, Mother Mary had painted both within the picture and kept them for remembrance. There's another photo contained in the archives of the Mother House, which shows the General Economist, rule conform on the right hand of Mother Mary, and exactly in the same position as it is in the painted picture. There's another photo which shows 5 sisters of the Mother House posing in different praying positions, as you might see, with their hands, and who are all incorporated in the picture. Now you see the same thing which you saw beforehand on the photo, now you see it in painting, and if you remember, the typical positions of the hands which were embedded in the photo, and here again, there's Sister Ancilla in a slightly different position, looking up to Mother Mary, to Saint Mary, and praying firmly. And as we remember, she had left around 5 years before this was painted. Here you see a picture of Bishop Bloom, which was taken shortly before he went into exile, and which was then painted in the big triptych. It's exactly the same position, it's the same clothes, with a slight difference in the headdress. Mind you, this picture was used as on his death card, which at this time was an absolutely new invention. As Bishop Bloom was photographed, he was painted, but as it turned out last year through research, that architect Meckel, who was responsible for his tombstone in Limburg Cathedral, had a sketch made exactly in the same kneeling position he was in Dambach, and then later on carved it into stone. It's the only grave of the bishop in the Limburg Cathedral which has this kind of grave. On the right panel, Superior Vitae is depicted. Congregations at this time had to have a male superior, and in our case it was Superior Vitae. He came from the Westerwald. Now, looking again at the central and inner panels of the triptych, we should keep in mind that this picture was commissioned during the Culture War. Now we give some attention to the left wing and to the relationship of patrons. The 2 persons depicted are St. Peter, who is in a central position, and he's identifiable through the halo, and, of course, his attributive key. He is the patron saint of Peter Joseph Bloom, Bishop of Limburg from 1842 to 1884. Bloom, as we are fully aware that we are at the time of the Culture War, Bloom had been tried and sentenced and was awaiting a further trial. So he flew into exile, where he remained from 1876 to 1883. He left Limburg via Dambach to go to Chateau Hyde and Eger in Bohemia. Now we should pay some attention to the gestures of the hands and of the views. St. Peter is showing a protective gesture with his hand, with his open hand also blessing the bishop, which is kneeling towards his feet, whilst the bishop has with his hands a distinctive praying attitude. The gestures of the hands also show addressing, but as we see, St. Peter is pointing towards us, the onlookers, whilst the hand of Bishop Bloom are pointing towards the central panel. There's a little trick the artist applied, which is connecting it to reality. The clothing reaches beyond, outside the picture. It's the same trick he will apply to the picture of Superior Vitae, where we shall go to now. Now, we're talking about the right wing, and again, still, our topic is the relationship of and to the patrons. The two persons who are depicted here is St. James, Jakob in German, who is visible in the central position, identifiable through halo and his attributed walking stick. He's barefooted, which is a Franciscan hint, a quote out of church history. St. James is the patron saint of Johann Jakob Vitae. Vitae was the first superior of the PHJC from 1853 to 1870, thence becoming the bishop's commissioner for the PHJC from 1870 to 1881, where he died. Now we look at the gestures of the hands and of the views of the two persons. Whilst St. James is giving support to the kneeling Vitae, Vitae is in a moment of adoration and prayer. Both are focusing on the central panel, and both are connecting into reality, because Vitae's clothing reaches beyond outside the picture. Now, the little clap Vitae gets from St. James is due to the fact that Vitae, in his position as superior, was not always going conform with the views of Mother Mary, and in doing so, he wrote letters to the bishop complaining about her. Well, but at the end, Mother Mary prevailed. Now, I do hope I gave you some insight into this painting, which is in the Mother House and which is highly treasured. I thank Mr. Kreutzer and Mr. Dillmann for their great support.